Hi, my name's Lyle, and my family stopped inviting me years ago. No birthdays, no holidays, not even a seat at my own mother's table. They said it was just distance, just grief. But behind that silence was a plan, one they all whispered about when I wasn't around. Turns out, while I was mourning my father, my stepfather was changing his name, forging documents, and taking the house my dad built, brick by brick, lie by lie. And the night I found out, I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just walked into that dining room and made sure none of them ever stepped foot in that house again. But here's the thing, that wasn't even the worst of it. What came after? That's the part no one was ready for. So, what would you do if the people who raised you were the same ones who erased you? The air had that kind of chill that settles in when fall is about to give up to winter. I was driving through my mother's neighborhood in Charleston, the same route I'd taken since I was 16, back when my dad still mowed the lawn every Sunday, and the porch light meant, "Come on in, son." That light hadn't been on for a long time. I slowed down as I passed her house, or what used to be ours. There were 3 cars parked along the curb, none of them familiar. Through the big window facing the street, I could see my mother, Marjorie, in her favorite beige cardigan, sitting beside Carlos. He had his arm around the back of her chair like he owned it. Maybe he thought he did. Across from them were his kids, grown adults now, but still carrying that smugness that never quite left their faces. They were laughing, plates clinking, candles glowing. The porch light was off. That detail stuck out like a bruise on a perfect picture. I told myself I was just driving by, but if I was honest, I'd been circling that street for 10 minutes, like some outsider waiting for an invitation that would never come. "They never invited me," I whispered, my breath fogging the window. Maybe they thought I didn't notice, but I did, every single time. It used to be my job to change that light bulb when it burned out. Dad taught me how to wire it when I was 12. He said, "That light's our welcome sign, Lyle. You see it on, you know you're home." Now it was dark. I parked 2 houses down, engine still running, and watched as Carlos stood up to make a toast. He raised his glass with that kind of fake warmth people use when they're performing kindness. "To family," he said, grinning. "The people who choose to stay." Marjorie laughed, but it wasn't real. I saw it. That tight smile, her eyes flicking toward the window for just a second. She knew I was out there, and she looked away. Something in me folded inward. I'd seen her turn her back plenty of times, but not like this. I thought about knocking, walking right up that porch and asking for a seat, maybe even pretending it didn't sting. But I didn't move. Instead, I sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. I told myself I was just passing by, I thought, staring at the lightless porch. But I had nowhere else to go. A vibration broke the silence, my phone lighting up in the passenger seat. A group message, the family thread my mother used since she married Carlos. For a second, I almost smiled. Maybe they noticed I wasn't there. Then I read it. "Dinner's at 6. Don't tell Lyle. He always ruins the mood." My stomach dropped, but my face didn't change. I just stared at the screen until the letters blurred. An accidental invite, meant for them, not me. I didn't reply. I didn't even breathe for a few seconds. Then I hit delete. But the thing about deleting is, it doesn't erase what you felt before you press the button. I started the car again, heading nowhere in particular, just following the empty streets until I found a diner still open. the kind with buzzing lights and burnt coffee. I ordered a slice of pie I didn't eat, staring at the clock instead. It was almost 9 when I left. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe habit, maybe stupidity. But I decided to swing by Mom's house again. I had some old mail for her in the back seat. The kind of excuse people invent when they're looking for a reason to show up. When I pulled up, the lights inside were still on. I climbed out, walked up the familiar steps, and reached for the doorknob. Cold metal. My key didn't fit. I tried again. Slower this time, like the key might understand what I needed. But it didn't. The lock was new, shiny, brass, catching the porch light from the neighbor's yard. My key was useless. I knocked once, then again. The sound barely carried. From inside, laughter floated through the wall. Carlos's low voice, Marjorie's softer one, and the clink of dishes being cleared. No footsteps came toward the door. I stood there for a while, not angry, just hollow. The kind of quiet that sits behind your ribs and doesn't leave. My eyes burned, but nothing fell. They didn't forget me, I thought. They just moved on. The porch light above me stayed dark. The bulb was still the same one I'd wired years ago. It hadn't burned out. Someone had just stopped turning it on. I walked back to my car, looked once more at the window, at the silhouettes moving inside that used to be my family. Then I raised my phone and took a picture. The house framed perfectly, warm inside, cold outside. I didn't know it yet, but that picture would matter later. I sat in the driver's seat, engine off, the phone glowing again in my hand. I'd deleted the message earlier, but the group chat was still open. My thumb hovered for a long moment before I decided not to close it this time. That message wasn't meant for me, I whispered to myself, looking back at the house through the windshield. But maybe it was exactly what I needed. The next morning, I decided to find out just how many things in that house no longer had my name on them. I got up early, skipped breakfast, and drove across town with a small bundle of old papers tucked into the passenger seat. Invoices, some mail addressed to my mom, and a couple of tools from Dad's workshop I thought she might still want. It wasn't much, but it gave me a reason to show up. The streets were quiet. A thin layer of leaves covered the sidewalk in front of her house. It looked cleaner than usual, like someone had started caring too much, or pretending to. The siding was freshly painted a soft gray, and new flower beds lined the front. Her place used to have a mismatched porch swing, some chipped bricks, and a flagpole that hadn't had a flag on it since Dad passed. Now it looked like a real estate ad. I walked up the front steps, slower than usual, and paused at the door. I remembered replacing the hinges on it when I was 17, right before prom. That was the night Dad taught me how to sand wood grain. Every part matters, he said, even the ones nobody sees. Carlos answered the door, wearing loafers and one of those half-zipped golf vests that made him look like he owned a dealership. "Well," he said with a smile too big for the hour, "didn't expect you so early." "I didn't expect to need an appointment," I replied, holding up the folder of mail. He stepped aside. "Come on in, kid." I hated when he called me that. Kid. I'm 38. I've paid mortgages, buried my father, fixed roofs, and filed taxes through 2 recessions. I wasn't a kid, but I let it slide. Inside, the house smelled like lemon polish. There was faint piano music playing. Something generic, like what you hear in a hotel lobby. The furniture was different. Softer colors, cleaner lines. It looked like a catalog. The pictures on the wall had changed too. The old family photo with me and Dad in the fishing boat was gone. In its place, Carlos with his arms around his kids, Trevor, Lennon, and Mara, all dressed like they were at a family reunion I never got the memo about. I walked down the hallway slowly, my boots thudding against the wood floor I'd helped refinish once. When you start to feel like a guest in your own home, I thought, you know something's already gone wrong. Marjorie was in the kitchen, clinking dishes around like it was just another Wednesday. She looked up, surprised, then gave me a quick hug. The kind people give at funerals, polite and stiff. "You want some coffee?" she asked, not quite meeting my eyes. "Sure." While she reached for mugs, I wandered toward the living room. Something on the wall caught my eye, a new frame near the hallway mirror. It wasn't a photo. It was a document, framed like a diploma. I stepped closer. It was a property deed. At the bottom, registered owners, Carlos Vane and Marjorie Hale Vane. The date, just 6 months after Carlos moved in. My mouth went dry. That house used to have my name on the title as co-heir. Dad told me it would always be mine when the time came. Carlos appeared at my shoulder. "Oh, that. It's just for the insurance file," he said, voice breezy. "You wouldn't understand. Legal stuff. It's complicated." I stared at the signature line. My dad's name, but it was scanned, digitally pasted. No pen marks, no ink smudge. A clean copied replica. I didn't say anything. "You all right?" Carlos asked. "I'm just wondering how something so permanent ended up looking so fake." He laughed like I was joking. I didn't laugh back. Lunch was quiet. Marjorie set the table for 6, even though it was just us 3. Or so I thought. Then Trevor and Mara walked in, loud and casual, like they lived there. Lennon followed with a grocery bag and a smirk. Carlos waved at the chairs. "You can take the one by the kitchen door, Lyle. Every other seat was taken." Trevor grinned. "Or you can stand. Builds character." I forced a laugh. "That's all right. I've stood for worse." No one replied. The food was fine. I barely tasted it. Every bite was a reminder that I didn't belong. The kitchen was too quiet between jokes I didn't get and memories I wasn't part of. Marjorie glanced at me. "Don't take it personally, honey. We're just trying to keep things simple." I smiled. It felt tight on my face. When she turned to pour more tea, I whispered, "Simple for who?" Nobody answered that either. After lunch, I walked back through the house. I didn't touch anything, just looked. Carlos's children were in every photo now. Birthday parties, vacations, even a fishing trip. My picture, gone. It's funny how you can lose a place before you ever move out of it, I thought. I stepped onto the porch and turned back toward the door. Marjorie was standing in the hallway, folding napkins like it was any other day. "Dad built this house so no one would ever feel like a guest," I said. "Funny how things change." She didn't say a word. I got in my truck, pulled down the street, and glanced once more at the porch light, still off. When I reached the stop sign, I pulled out my phone. The group message was still there. And then I noticed something. The sender wasn't Carlos. It was her. Mom had sent that message. That changed everything. I started digging into what else she might have hidden and how deep it went. By late afternoon, I found myself sitting in my truck outside the Charleston County Records office, fingers hovering above the steering wheel. The building looked the same as it had when Dad used to bring me here as a kid. Pale brick, narrow windows, the flag out front limp in the still air. But the last time I was here, we were filing paperwork to expand his construction company. Now I was about to find out if that same company and the house it built had been taken from me for good. I stayed there longer than I meant to. The sound of the engine ticking as it cooled was the only thing keeping me from going inside. I wasn't chasing money. I just needed to know if I'd made it all up, if I'd misunderstood what my father left behind, or if they'd truly erased me. Finally, I got out and went in. The records office smelled like dust and toner. Fluorescent lights hummed above, making everything look too sharp, too sterile. A woman behind the counter looked up from her computer when I gave her my name and the company, Marin Construction. Her eyes flickered with recognition. "You're the son, right? I remember that name. Thought that company folded after the merger?" The word merger stuck to my ribs. I didn't answer. She must have noticed because she cleared her throat and said quietly, "Give me a few minutes." I waited by the old filing cabinets, the kind still labeled with paper tags. My reflection in the glass door looked tired, older than I felt yesterday. When she returned, she placed a stack of printed pages in front of me. "Here you go, Mr. Marin. You might want to sit down for this one." I did. The top document was a property record. The Marin estate, my father's business holdings, his home, the land, had been transferred to Vane Holdings LLC 6 months after his funeral. My name was nowhere. The beneficiary had been changed to Marjorie Hale, but what made my chest tighten wasn't the missing name. It was the signature beneath it, my mother's. The authorization date matched almost exactly with the day Carlos moved in. I read the words again, slower this time. Each letter cut deeper. "She didn't just forget me," I whispered. "She erased me." No one in the office heard. No one would have cared if they did. Around me, people were talking about property taxes, license renewals, small noises of normal life. It's strange how betrayal doesn't sound like thunder. Sometimes it sounds like printers and staplers. I signed the request to make copies, thanked the clerk, and walked out into the sunlight that didn't feel warm anymore. The drive home blurred by. I couldn't even remember the turns I took. When I parked outside my apartment, the sky had already started to dim, streaks of pink fading behind the marsh. I sat there for a while, engine off, holding those pages like they were proof that I hadn't gone crazy, proof that I'd been right all along. That evening, I spread everything out on my kitchen table. The deeds, the signatures, the paper trail. Then, I opened my laptop and pulled up old bank statements Dad had once kept organized down to the cent. I still had digital access because he'd made me joint administrator when he got sick. It took an hour before I saw it. A recurring payment labeled household maintenance reimbursement, transferred every month to a company name I didn't recognize, TL Renovations. A quick search told me enough. The company was owned by Trevor Vane, Carlos's son. And the dates? The payment started months before any renovation had even begun. They were siphoning money out of my father's estate before the paint had dried, before the porch light had ever been turned off. For a while, I just sat there, watching the cursor blink on the screen. No anger, not yet, just a kind of quiet clarity. They wanted me gone, I thought, so they could cash in without guilt. Maybe I'd let them keep thinking I was blind. The decision formed slowly, like a brick setting in mortar. I started scanning the documents one by one, saving copies to a flash drive, another to a cloud folder. I labeled the folder Blueprints. Dad used to say every solid house started with one. And this was going to be mine. When I was done, I leaned back in my chair, exhausted. I looked at one of the old photos of Dad on the wall. Him in his work jacket, grinning, blueprints rolled under his arm. I remembered what he said the day he first handed me a pencil and a sheet of drafting paper. Every wall you build will stand, son, but only if it's built with truth. I realized then, this family had built everything since on lies. I shut the laptop, stacked the papers, and tucked them into an envelope. I wasn't ready to confront anyone, not yet. Timing mattered. If I'd learned anything from watching my stepfather, it was that people who think they've already won never see the next storm coming. Before bed, I checked my phone. One new voicemail. I hit play. Lyle, honey, don't come by tomorrow. We're having family over again. It's not a good time. Her voice wavered at the end. Not from nerves, from guilt. For the first time, I heard it in her tone. And that word, family. It hit me harder than I expected. She said it like I wasn't part of it anymore. I sat with that for a while, letting the silence in my truck swallow the rest of me. By Sunday, I couldn't take it anymore, so I decided to see what kind of family they were without me. The sky had started turning amber when I pulled up. I parked 2 houses down, out of habit more than caution. I wasn't invited, and I wasn't sure what I was doing there, but something inside me needed to look. Really look. I grabbed a bottle of wine from the passenger seat, cheap, unopened, more like a prop than anything, and started walking toward the house my father built with his own hands. The lights glowed warmly from every window. Laughter floated out in bursts, the kind that carried through autumn air like music. I stood by the edge of the porch, hearing forks tap against china, someone talking too loud about football, the clink of a wine glass being raised in toast. I rang the bell. Footsteps approached. Then the door creaked open. Carlos stood there in a burgundy sweater like he'd been expecting a magazine photographer. "Oh," he said, his smile stiff. "Didn't you get the message, Lyle? This one's just for immediate family." I held up the bottle. "I wasn't coming for dinner," I said. "Just thought I'd drop by." "Sure." He stepped aside just enough for me to enter. "Well, you're here now." The moment I crossed the threshold, I felt it. The way air changes in a room when someone walks in who isn't welcome. Conversations tapered off. Forks paused mid-air. Marjorie was at the far end of the table, refilling someone's glass. She didn't look up. I scanned the room. Everyone else was seated, all dressed nicely, like they were celebrating something. There was an empty seat near the kitchen entrance. A younger woman, someone I didn't recognize, gestured toward it. "You can sit there," she said lightly. "If you're staying." Carlos laughed too loud. "That seat's always free," he said, eyes never quite meeting mine. "It's out of the way." I walked over and sat. No one stopped me, but no one really resumed talking either. They just adjusted. Sometimes, to see how much you don't belong, you have to show up anyway. Dinner crawled forward. Someone cracked a joke about in-laws. Carlos launched into a story about a fishing trip the boys took last spring. Marjorie passed rolls like a robot. Not once did she glance in my direction. Then Carlos raised his glass. "To family," he said, "the ones who show up, pitch in, and earn their place at the table." Everyone laughed. I didn't. It's easy to laugh when you've never been the punchline. After a while, I excused myself, mumbling something about needing the bathroom. Instead, I walked down the hall, toward the back of the house. I knew this layout better than my own skin. My father designed it, mapped every inch of it in pencil first. Framed photos lined the hallway, but none of me. None of him. Instead, shots of Carlos and his kids fishing, standing on the deck of a boat I recognized all too well. The boat my dad and I spent months restoring before his heart gave out. I opened the hallway console. Inside, a stack of old photos lay face down, jammed between candle holders and extra napkins. I pulled one out. It was us. Me and Dad, standing outside the garage in the dust and sweat of early summer, the skeleton of the boat just behind us. They didn't throw us away. They just buried us under someone else's memories. I slipped the photo into my jacket and walked back into the dining room. Carlos was mid-sentence. "Trevor did most of the work on that boat," he said. "Brought it back from the dead." I let out a soft laugh, sharp and low. "Yeah," I said. "He did a great job repainting over my father's name." The room froze again. Marjorie looked like she might cry, but she didn't say anything, just stared down at her plate. "Lyle," she said after a beat, "please don't start." I stood, calm, cold. "No, Mom," I said, voice steady. "I think I just finished." No one stopped me as I walked out. No one said goodbye. Behind me, Carlos muttered something, probably about me being dramatic. But I didn't slam the door. I closed it soft, like it didn't deserve the effort of noise. Outside, the sky had deepened into dusk. I got in my truck, let the silence settle. Then, I pulled out the photo from my jacket. I looked at it again. Me and Dad, sunburnt and proud. But something was folded behind it. I turned it over. A yellowed receipt. For marine-grade epoxy, sanding tools, varnish. Dated 6 weeks after my father died. Signed at the bottom, Carlos Vane. That receipt didn't just prove who rebuilt the boat, it proved who destroyed my father's legacy. That night, I decided I wasn't going to let them rewrite history without me. I didn't go home. I didn't sleep. I drove straight out of town, following the old back roads that wound through the trees like a memory I couldn't shake. The Marin cabin sat by the lake, 20 miles from Charleston, but a lifetime away from everything else. My father used to call it our real home. It hadn't changed much since the funeral. The porch light still hung crooked, the same one we never bothered to fix. The air smelled of pine and oil, a mix that clung to my childhood. Inside, it was cold, dust on every surface, cobwebs stretched between the tools on the wall. I set the framed photo on the kitchen table, the one I'd taken from my mother's hallway. Then I laid the documents beside it, the receipts, the deeds, the bank statements. I wanted to see the story laid out in black and white. The story of how my father's work had been stolen piece by piece, and how I'd stood by, too quiet to stop it. I found an old bottle tucked behind a shelf. Whiskey, the kind Dad kept for celebrations. I cracked it open. The first sip burned. The second didn't. Grief doesn't vanish. It waits. And when everyone else forgets, it sits beside you, patient as dust. I looked at the papers again, tracing each signature with my finger. The names blurred together. His, hers, theirs. All of it part of the same lie. Then I saw something new. Buried in one of the scanned files on my laptop was a familiar form, one I'd signed years ago, giving Mom temporary control over Dad's accounts. But this version was different. My name was there again, the same signature. Copied, tilted, a little off. The form had been altered. My permission extended. Permanently. "They didn't just take what was mine," I whispered. "They used my own name to do it." It hit harder than I expected. Not just the theft, but the realization that my own trust had been turned into a weapon. The bottle slipped from my hand and rolled across the floor, clinking against the table leg. I sat down hard in the old wooden chair by the window. His chair. I looked at it like it might talk back. "You told me to protect her," I said into the empty room. "You didn't tell me she'd be the one I needed protecting from." The silence was unbearable. I stood up, grabbed the bottle, and hurled it at the sink. It shattered, sharp and final. The sound filled the cabin, the kind of sound that ends something. For a long time, I just stood there, breathing hard. Then, almost by instinct, I grabbed a towel and started cleaning up the mess. The smell of alcohol mixed with the old wood and metal. That's when I saw it. An envelope taped beneath the drawer, yellowed and curling at the edges. My father's handwriting. I tore it free carefully. On the front, for Lyle. Inside was a folded note and a key. "If you're reading this, son," it began, "then you've seen what I couldn't fix. People hide things when they're afraid of losing, but truth's like water. It finds its way. Don't let silence bury you with them." Beneath the note was a business card. Harold Denton, attorney at law, the same man who used to handle Dad's contracts years ago. I sat there staring at it for a long while, the wind rattling the windows behind me. Outside, the storm that had been building all evening finally began to ease. The rain softened and the world went still again. I looked down at the key in my hand. Brass, worn, familiar. It looked like it belonged to a drawer or safe, something small, something important. For the first time in years, I felt something that wasn't grief. Clarity. I'd spent years thinking silence was strength. Turns out, it was surrender. I walked to the window and looked out across the lake. The reflection of the moon rippled across the surface, breaking with every gust of wind. I saw myself in it, fractured, but still there. The man staring back wasn't the one who got pushed to the end of the table. He wasn't the forgotten son or the quiet observer. He was someone rebuilding from the ruins. I gathered the papers into a folder and labeled it the same way my father would have. Blueprints. The phone on the counter buzzed. My hands were still shaking when I picked it up. I dialed the number on the card. The line clicked. "Harold Denton speaking," a steady voice said. "This is Lyle Marin," I answered. "You once worked with my father. I think I found something he left for me." Silence stretched, then the voice came back, slower this time. "Then you'd better come in tomorrow, son. We have a lot to talk about." I hung up and sat down again, letting out a long, uneven breath. For the first time, I felt the weight shift off my chest. Not gone, just lighter. The photo on the table caught a sliver of moonlight. Dad's face, half lit, smiling faintly. "If silence was my prison," I whispered, "truth was the key." And I just found it. By the time the sun stretched over the pine trees behind the cabin, I was already halfway back to Charleston. I hadn't slept, didn't feel like I needed to. My mind was too sharp, too alive. Like someone had finally cut the fog I'd been living in for years. I drove into the city just after rush hour, the manila envelope riding shotgun beside me like it had its own heartbeat. The key sat in my jacket pocket, warm from the press of my hand. It was old brass, but felt heavier than steel. Downtown Charleston still held its quiet charm. Iron balconies, brick sidewalks, and shutters that had seen a century pass. I pulled up to a modest law office tucked between a bakery and a bookstore. The lettering on the window read Harold Denton and Associates in faded gold paint. Inside, it smelled of old books and stronger coffee. A secretary, maybe in her 50s, looked up with a mix of curiosity and warmth. "You must be Mr. Marin," she said before I could speak. "He's been expecting you." The hallway creaked beneath my boots as she led me back. Harold Denton stood when I walked in. Silver hair, thick glasses, and the kind of presence that didn't need to raise its voice. He looked at me like I was a ghost from a story he used to know. "You look just like him," he said. "Come on in, son." We sat across a heavy oak desk that looked like it had anchored that room since before I was born. I handed him the envelope and watched his face shift as he skimmed the contents. After a pause, he opened a drawer, produced a locked tin box, and turned a small brass key that matched the one from my pocket. Inside was a file stamped Marin Trust, confidential. "I've kept this since your father passed," Denton said. Instructions were clear. Only you could open it. He laid out the documents carefully. There it was, a private trust account set up in my name, scheduled for release upon marriage or turning 40. Whichever came first. But then Denton flipped to the transaction log. I leaned forward, my heart catching. 3 years ago, someone accessed the funds using power of attorney, the name signed at the bottom, Carlos Vane. My throat tightened. "He didn't just take my house," I muttered. "He took my future." Denton didn't look surprised. "That account was meant for you to build your life. He filed as guardian on behalf of your mother, citing emotional instability after your father's death." I stared at the page, the signature I'd once trusted, Marjorie Hale. Neat, steady, cold. "They called my grief a disorder so they could steal with clean hands," I said, the words tasting like rust. We sat in silence for a long moment, the only sound the distant hum of a window unit trying its best. Denton reached into another folder and pulled out an old photograph. "There's something else you should see." I looked down and felt the breath leave me. Carlos, but younger, thinner, dressed in a cheap suit, standing in front of a courtroom. A name scrawled in faded ink across the bottom. Martin Keller, convicted of fraud, identity theft, served 5 years in prison under a different name. "So the man who married my mother," I said, not looking up, "was a man who'd already stolen someone else's life." Denton leaned back. "Your father found out about it shortly before his death. He was preparing to take legal action. Then the accident happened." The floor under me might as well have disappeared. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. After a long moment, I simply said, "Can I get copies of everything?" He nodded. "I'll need a day. And Lyle, you should prepare yourself. There's likely more." "I've been preparing for years," I answered. I walked out of that office into the late morning light with a new weight. Not grief, not even rage. Just a clear, centered fire. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming what should have never been taken and exposing what they'd buried. I passed the coffee shop where I used to meet Dad after site visits, the one where we'd sketch out project ideas on napkins. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a contact I hadn't called in years, Sandra Vale, a former real estate journalist turned freelance investigator. She picked up after the second ring. "Didn't expect to hear from you, Lyle." "I've got a story," I said. "One that starts with fraud and ends with my father's name being buried." We agreed to meet the next evening. "If he built his life on stolen names," I said before hanging up, "then I'll make sure everyone knows whose name he used last." I walked the last few blocks to my truck. The wind had picked up, carrying the faint scent of the ocean. And something else. Change. As I approached the driver's side, something fluttered on the windshield. A note, folded once, tucked under the wiper. It wasn't typed. The handwriting was too familiar. Sharp, heavy, deliberate. "Stop digging, Lyle. You won't like what you find." No signature. Just a grease smudge at the bottom. Carlos's mark. He knew I was looking, which meant the game had just changed. He knew I was looking, which meant the game had just changed. By the next night, I wasn't the only one digging for truth. They were digging for me. The rain had started early that evening, a soft, persistent drizzle that blurred the streetlights and made the sidewalks gleam. Charleston always felt quieter in the rain, like the city held its breath. I pulled into the cafe parking lot a few minutes before 7, heart steady, folder on the passenger seat, phone fully charged. I'd picked the place carefully. Not too crowded, not too isolated. Neutral ground. The kind of spot with vintage tile floors, a chalkboard menu, and Ella Fitzgerald humming through old speakers. I'd come to meet Sandra Vale, but Carlos got there first. I was mid-sip on lukewarm coffee when the bell over the door jingled. He walked in like he owned the place. No umbrella, rain clinging to his coat, his eyes locked on me like he expected this meeting more than I did. He didn't ask, just pulled out the chair across from me and sat. "You've been busy," he said, voice low and steady. I didn't answer, just let the silence sit between us, like a loaded gun. "It's funny," he went on, taking a napkin, dabbing the water from his cuffs, "how grief makes some people productive, others reckless." He slid something across the table, a photo, grainy but clear enough. Me, at the cabin, holding the broken bottle, standing alone in the moonlight like a man on the edge. My stomach didn't turn. Not this time. "That the best you've got?" I asked. "A man cleaning up his own mess?" Carlos leaned in slightly, eyes narrowing with the faintest smirk. "You really think anyone's gonna believe the story you're building? You've been off the radar for years, drifting, drinking, talking to ghosts." His voice didn't rise. He didn't threaten. He didn't need to. Every word was a brick in the trap he was setting, painting me as unstable, emotional, unfit. Again, I stayed still. I let him talk. "You don't understand what this is, Lyle," he said. "This isn't a moral fight. It's a chess game, and you're not built for it." I smiled slowly. "No, I just built the house you're living in." His face didn't change, but the smirk died. That's when I tapped my phone, face down on the table. The red light blinked quietly. "So, when you used my signature for the trust fund," I said, calm as water, "was that before or after you decided to rename yourself?" He paused, longer than he meant to, then laughed, dry and forced. "You think any of this will hold up? It's your word against mine." "Not anymore," I said, collecting the folder. As I stood, I slid something toward him, the old boat receipt, the one he'd signed under the table. No copies, just the original. Proof. He stared down at it, and I didn't wait for a reply. I walked out before he could reclaim the upper hand. Outside, the rain had lightened, misting under the glow of the street lamps. I pulled my hood up, stepped into the parking lot, and hit speed dial. Sandra picked up on the second ring, her voice muffled by windshield wipers. "He showed up?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, and he talked, a lot. She paused, engine idling. "You ready to make this public?" "Not yet," I replied. "I want him to think I'm losing. Let him feel confident." That pause again, then a small chuckle from her. "You sound like your old man." "I finally get why he didn't yell," I said. "Silence gives them more room to reveal themselves." I hung up, watching my breath fog the windshield before starting the truck. The city blurred past me in slow motion as I drove. I wasn't just chasing evidence anymore. I was building a record. Every lie, every signature, every word they thought they could bury. And now I had their voices. When I got home, something felt off. The porch light was on. That hadn't happened in years. I never replaced the bulb after Dad died. I stepped out, key ready, heart pounding just a little faster now. The front door cracked open. Inside, everything looked still. Too still. The air didn't feel wrong. It felt erased. I walked into the living room. The photo, the one of me and Dad smiling in front of the foundation of our first build, was gone. Not broken, not turned around, just missing. Nothing else touched. No drawers open, no mess. He'd been here. This time, he wasn't just rewriting the past. He was trying to erase the present. I realized if I wanted to end this, I couldn't just expose him. I had to confront him where it all began. The night air over Charleston was heavy, thick with humidity and the quiet promise of a storm. I parked 2 houses down from what used to be home. The windows glowed like nothing had ever gone wrong. Through the curtains, I could see movement, shadows, laughter, the clinking of glass. Another family dinner. I stepped out, folder in hand, my father's old key cold against my palm. The metal edges bit slightly into my skin. It was a strange comfort. The walk up that path felt like walking through 2 decades of memory. Every step replayed echoes of hammer blows, my father's laughter, the sound of nails and sweat and work that built those walls. And now, the voices inside belonged to strangers. At the door, I didn't hesitate. I didn't use Carlos's key. I used my father's. It slid in clean, turned smooth. The lock still remembered me. Inside, the hum of conversation faltered. Carlos's voice stopped mid-toast. Forks froze in midair. Marjorie's eyes met mine, pale, startled, guilty. I didn't come to yell, I said, voice calm, steady. I came to remind these walls who built them. Carlos set down his glass, forcing a smile that looked more like a wince. Lyle, son, you can't just walk in here. This is my house, I interrupted, and I just did. I laid the folder on the dining table, one by one pulling the contents free. The forged trust papers, the altar deed, the court record listing Martin Keller, and finally, a small USB drive. Carlos laughed once, short and sharp. You think waving papers around makes them true? No, I said, but your own voice will. The door opened again behind me. Sandra Vale stepped inside, phone raised, camera light glowing. Carlos's composure cracked. Turn that off. Public interest case, she said firmly. Fraud, identity theft, inheritance tampering. You're live, Mr. Keller. For a second, no one breathed. Then everything happened at once. Carlos shouting, Marjorie crying, one of his sons standing up in confusion. Marjorie's hand trembled around her napkin. Lyle, I didn't know. You didn't want to, I said softly. The room went silent again, like the house itself was listening. Carlos moved first, lunging for the folder, but I'd already backed away, calm as a man watching a fire he started to burn clean. Go ahead, I told him. It's all online now. Every signature, every file, every name you ever stole. Sandra's live stream caught everything, his rage, his threats, his panic. Somewhere outside, sirens began to wail. She'd called them earlier as insurance. Carlos turned to me, eyes burning. You'll regret this. I met his stare, unblinking. No, you will. When the police arrived, he tried to talk, to charm, but the mask was gone. His words stumbled. Excuses, tripping over each other. Marjorie stood off to the side, silent, eyes hollow. As they led him out, the sky finally broke open, rain falling steady and cold. I stepped onto the porch, letting it soak through my shirt. The air smelled like pine and freedom. Behind me, I heard her voice. Lyle, I never meant... I know, I said gently, turning just enough to meet her eyes, but love isn't supposed to look like silence. She crumpled in on herself, hands shaking, lips trembling with words that wouldn't come. I didn't wait to hear them. I walked down the steps, the old boards groaning under my weight, same as they did when I was a boy. At the bottom, I stopped. The porch light flickered above me, faint, struggling. I reached up, unscrewed the old bulb, and replaced it with the new one I'd been carrying in my pocket for weeks. It glowed to life, warm, golden, steady. Dad always said a light's only worth something if it helps you find your way home, I murmured. The rain softened to a mist. I turned and walked to my truck without looking back. Days later, the cabin by the lake felt different, brighter, lived in. The photo of Dad and me was back on the mantel, cleaned and framed properly. Sandra's article had gone live that morning. The story had spread faster than either of us expected. The comment section filled with pain and recognition. My stepfather did this too. Families can hurt you worse than strangers. He did the right thing. I didn't read them all, just enough to know the truth had landed where it needed to. I made coffee, sat by the window, and looked out at the lake. The reflection of the porch light shimmered across the water, not from the house in Charleston, but from this cabin, my home now. They thought they could take the house my father built, I said quietly, but all they did was teach me how to rebuild myself. The wind rustled the trees outside, gentle, familiar. For the first time, the silence didn't hurt. It felt like peace. The house was quiet again, not empty, just finally mine. A week later, I went back to the house one last time, not for revenge, but for peace. The storm had passed, both in the sky and in my life. Headlines faded, the neighbors stopped whispering at mailboxes. Sandra's piece had its moment, and then the world moved on, as it always does. But I hadn't yet. There was one door left to close. The Marin house stood silent now, waiting for a for sale sign someone else would plant in the front yard. The police tape was gone. So were the evidence bags, the officers, the noise. Only memory remained, settling in the corners like old dust. I parked across the street, engine idling for a moment longer than necessary. The sun was beginning its descent, that perfect golden hour that makes even the broken things look like art. The door creaked when I stepped in. I didn't flinch. My boots hit the same floorboards I used to sneak across after curfew. The hallway still had the faint scent of paint and cedar. I reached out and touched the wall. 13 years old, my hands smaller. My dad steadying mine as I struggled to keep the roller even. Just a wall, I whispered, but it held everything. Room by room, I walked slow, not out of caution, out of respect, like each one had a voice I didn't want to talk over. The kitchen still smelled faintly of dust and time. I stepped in and stopped short. On the counter was a folded scarf, Mom's. The old lavender one she used to wear every fall. I picked it up, ran my fingers over the worn fabric, and folded it neater. We all lost something in this house, I murmured, setting it gently beside the sink. She lived upstate now with her sister. Quiet place, no phone calls, no letters, not even a voicemail when I left her the update on Carlos's sentencing. But I wasn't angry. She wasn't evil, just scared. And fear, if you sit in it too long, starts looking a lot like loyalty. She stayed quiet because it was easier than facing what she'd allowed. I understood now. Didn't agree, but I understood. I sat in the living room for a while. The sun had shifted, slanting through the broken blinds. On the wall, I could still see the faint outline where our family photo used to hang, the one with all of us before everything got complicated. It hit me all over again. How time doesn't heal. It just teaches you how to hold the wound without screaming. After a while, I stood up and took one last look around. No tears, no speeches, just goodbye in its purest form. Walking away without dragging the past behind you. By dusk, I was back at Marin Lake. The cabin had become more than shelter. It was mine now, not just legally, but spiritually. The porch boards groaned under my steps the way they always had. I opened the door, inhaled the smell of pine, dust, and something else. Calm. On the mantel, I placed the photo of Dad and me, finally framed, finally clean. Beside it, a small note in my own handwriting. The truth is safe now. Didn't sit inside. Instead, I grabbed a folded blanket from the bench and settled on the porch, watching the water catch the orange and pink from the dying sun. Birds skimmed the surface. Somewhere behind the tree line, a dog barked once, then nothing. And then, a soft click. I looked up. The porch light flicked on, automatic, quiet, just like it was supposed to. Dad once told me, light doesn't chase darkness away. It just reminds you where home is. I smiled. That light had seen years of silence, secrets, and shame. And now, it simply glowed. Not for drama, not for show. Just to be there, the way he always was. I leaned back, letting the chill settle around me. The kind that doesn't make you shiver, just makes you feel awake. Forgiveness, I've learned, doesn't mean forgetting. And it's not about telling someone they were right. It's about deciding their weight doesn't belong in your hands anymore. I didn't forgive Carlos for him. I forgave him so I wouldn't carry his name in my thoughts anymore. Same with my mother. Same with the silence. It's funny. I used to whisper when I talked about my father, like I had to earn the right to speak his name out loud. Now I speak it with peace. Lyle Marin, son of James Marin, builder, fighter, survivor, truth teller. The lake was still, glassy. In its reflection, I saw the porch light, warm, soft, steady, like a heartbeat finally calmed. I stood, folded the blanket, and turned toward the cabin. At the door, I paused, hand on the lock. My eyes scanned the trees, the path, the stillness. I used to think silence meant weakness. Now I know. It's just what strength sounds like when it finally rests. I locked the door behind me, walked toward the truck. Halfway there, my phone buzzed. Sandra Vale. One message. They want to adapt your story. TV network. Call me when you're ready. I stopped, thumb hovering over the screen, and looked back one more time. The cabin. The light. The peace. Maybe some stories don't end. They just stop needing to be told.